murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get right to it. So, in the United Nations, just recently, the United States demanded that Russia cease and desist with its attacks and war against Ukraine. United States, it seems so ironic that they would make such demands of other countries in terms of how these countries conduct wars, when the United States, for everyone to see, um, commits atrocious acts towards not only civilians in the war, but also the infrastructure. United States demands came as a result of Russia's bombardment of Kyiv. They are saying they're taking the kid gloves off now, and they are systematically bombarding and bombing certain landmarks and places in Kyiv that they deem are military strategic military targets. So United States is, for what seems, to be nothing other than coming to the rescue of Ukraine as a result of Russia's intense bombardment there in the last few days. Now, Russia, it targets Kyiv in an effort to compel Ukraine into submission, weaken its military industrial complex, and force capitulation. Now, Moscow views the capital as the decision-making center of the Ukrainian government. There are key drivers behind these attacks, which include strategic retaliation. Russia frequently frames its barrages as direct responses to Ukrainian counterstrikes, such as drone operations and military attacks on Russian-held infrastructure. The demilitarization of Kyiv, it seems to be a stated goal of the conflict in this demilitarization, of Ukraine by Russia. Russia is prompting, or they're prompting, targeted strikes on command centers, air defenses, and drone production facilities. It's known that Ukraine are beginning to produce some very, very accurate, and not only accurate, but also drones that are high level drones. There seem to be better production than that of Russia. Ukraine has over the years perfected the marketing and production of these drones that can go very long distances and carry heavy payloads. The psychological pressure applied by Russia is done by conducting severe long-range aerial attacks and warning foreign diplomats and civilians to flee. Russia attempts to degrade public morale, cause infrastructural damage, and disrupt everyday governance. But this seems to be a tactic that most governments use when they are at war or attacking another country. Israel, for instance, does this, and there are times where they won't notify civilians that they're about to blow up whole city blocks. United States does it as well. We've seen it done in Iran, as recent as a month ago, or at the beginning of the war that started February 28th, when a schoolgirl, or a school for girls, was bombed, and 160, or over 160 children and others were killed as a result of that bombing. That in and of itself is psychological for the residents, so we can see where countries do this. The regime of Israel does it in Palestine, as well as Lebanon. The United States does it in Iran, and here Russia does it in Kyiv. All right. So, but that seems to be the nature of war. The Institute of the Study of War also noted that Moscow traditionally intensifies its bombardment campaigns to distract from poor battlefield performance, retaliate for frontline setbacks, and influence geopolitical negotiations. Now, that being said, I would imagine that most countries or militaries would apply or employ those type of tactics, especially when failures occur. And to make up for those failures, yet they would set out to create a more uh, intense battlefield performance to make up again for those losses or setbacks or inadequacies. We see the United States do it all the time. We see that Israel, the regime in Israel, does it all the time, as well as Russia is also, does this in a means to, correct or make up for losses or inadequacies. Then that being said, I do have a clip. I want to involve this clip as content as well as context, because this meeting or this back and forth is taking place at the United Nations between diplomats from Russia as well as the United States. And again, it's just like the United States to always have something to say in terms of how war is being committed, or they want to always come off as the good guy, So that being said, let's involve this clip. Before I do, please like, share, follow, comment, and subscribe to TAP, the Art of Political Discourse. Your involvement and viewership with this channel means a great deal to us. We also ask that you help us by liking and sharing this podcast and its content to others in the hopes that we can get them as subscribers as well. That being said, let's get to this content. All right. And this is courtesy of Times of India. And so it says, no mercy will destroy Kyiv. Russia rejects U.S. plea against Ukraine bombarding. Wow. Again, that's just like America to ask of such a thing when they bombarded Iran literally for nothing and didn't care one flick about, who was killed or hurt or maimed in that bombardment. But here they are trying to take the upper road. It seem like they are, just, the best of the best in terms of how they conduct war. They don't have these problems, or they don't bomb or bombard, other countries into submission. Okay, let's get to this.
Russia rejected a direct U.S. warning at the UN Security Council. Instead of backing down, Moscow doubled down on its threat of systematic strikes against Kyiv. The clash unfolded during an emergency UN session called after Russia's massive drone and missile assault on Kyiv and nearby regions. Russian envoy Vasily Nebenzia defended plans for fresh attacks on what Moscow calls decision-making centers and command posts inside Kyiv. Because Russia claims these facilities are spread across the Ukrainian capital, it issued a stark warning to foreign diplomats and international staff to leave Kyiv immediately.
The latest mass strikes against Kyiv by Russia over the weekend, including the deployment of the Orishnik hypersonic ballistic missiles, are an inexplicable, dangerous, and barbaric escalation. They are another example of why the Russia-Ukraine war must end immediately and permanently. Once again, as you've heard from your colleagues, civilians were killed and more than 100 injured. Museums, public transportation infrastructure, residential buildings.
And again, that's just like America to point out what someone else is doing while disregarding or forgetting intentionally what they're doing, for instance, in Iran, where infrastructure, colleges, buildings that had nothing to do with the war, civilians were indiscriminately bombed, and the United States had no compunction about bombing them. But here they are pointing the finger at someone else as though, hey, you guys aren't conducting warfare correctly. We should know because we were the best at it. And yet you look at what's going on in Iran, and it shows without a doubt that America is the pot calling the kettle black.
And more were destroyed or damaged. Deliberate attacks against civilians are obscene and unacceptable. The United States extends its deepest sympathies to all those affected. We caution Russia not to mount so-called systematic strikes against Kyiv, which risk further civilian casualties and setting back the prospect of peace.
Well, it was America that just recently said, Donald Trump, the president, that they were going to decimate the infrastructure. All right. Now, this is after they've already destroyed over 30 colleges and universities and other places where civilians had jobs or were, in the vicinity or inside these buildings that were bombed. They had no compunction then or worry or care for the Iranian citizen. And yet here they are browbeating Russia in terms of how they're conducting their war against Ukraine. Again, this is it's just extraordinary in terms of how Russia or the United States goes about pointing its finger at others when, they're doing the same exact thing or worse.
We note, too, with serious concern, Russia's apparent disregard for the protections afforded to diplomatic facilities and personnel under international law. We remind Russia, in clear terms, of its legal obligations, and we add, diplomacy and negotiation are the only path forward towards lasting peace. Threats and incendiary rhetoric are clearly not part of that path.
And again, it just, it blows the mind to hear, this ambassador speak in such a tone or use such words about threats in the United States. Well, again, Donald Trump does it all the time. Do this or else, bend the knee, submit, or else we're going to destroy you, obliterate you, all coercion and threats. They just told Oman that we'll blow you up, threats. And yet here they are at the United Nations speaking as though they have a moral right to say these things or to hold others to a standard that they themselves does not respect.
Colleagues, the Russia-Ukraine war can only end with a negotiated settlement. The United States once again calls for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire as a step towards a durable, negotiated end to the war. The alternative is escalating violence that will spiral out of control. That is unacceptable. The war must stop. The United States calls on the Russian Federation to cease, and the international community, as the international community, calls for this system to break out of this cycle. We call for de-escalation, and we continue calls for both parties to negotiate in good faith to end this war. As Secretary Rubio said earlier this week, the United States stands prepared to play a constructive role as soon as any opportunity and real commitment from both parties presents itself. We are ready to do whatever is possible to stop the death and destruction.
We thank the country that needs to be in this meeting for giving us another opportunity to once again draw the attention of the international community to what happened on May 22nd. Your goal, of course, was not that, but on the contrary, to distract attention from the tragedy in Starobelsk. And at last Friday's meeting, a number of Security Council members shamelessly cited a lack of information. On the night of May 22nd, the Kyiv regime once again showed its terrorist nature by launching a barbaric targeted strike on the Starobelsk Pedagogical College and dormitory using 16 UAVs. This tragedy claimed the lives of 21 people, primarily young girls. 4 people were injured.
Your online store is getting traffic, but no sales. Or you're struggling to optimize conversion rate.
And it seems
If anyone,
the states would protect someone who kills, school children or girls, since they've known or are known to have done the same thing. Now it come to find out Kyiv does the same thing and expects no retaliation as a result of those heinous crimes or that heinous crime. 16 drones at a girls' college. Bad business.
One in this room still doubts or is unfamiliar with the consequences of the strike on Starobelsk, then we recommend watching the video report we showed during the press conference on May 26th. More than 50 journalists from 19 countries who came to the scene of the tragedy at the invitation of the Russian side personally verified the accuracy of the information. No matter how Kyiv tries to make excuses, no matter how the so-called leading Western media try to turn a blind eye to what happened on the night of May 22nd is a cynical act of terrorism. The cruelty with which the Kyiv regime dealt with children can only be compared to the actions of the Nazis and their accomplices during World War II, who ruthlessly exterminated the civilian population. Particularly striking is the hypocrisy and cynical reaction of the delegations of European countries, which usually instantly launch accusations against Russia when it is politically convenient for them. But in this case, they preferred to virtually ignore the tragedy and place the responsibility on Moscow. But we were not surprised then, and we are not surprised now. What kind of human compassion on their part can we talk about when the blood of the children from Starobelsk is also on their hands? After all, for many years, their countries have been supplying Zelensky's terrorist regime with money, intelligence, weapons, and ammunition, inspiring it to commit new crimes against civilians, and then covering for it, painting it as a victim. The UN Secretariat, so prompt in other cases, unfortunately once again limited itself to general rhetoric and highly evasive language, avoiding a direct assessment of Kyiv's actions. Claiming there is no access to the scene of the tragedy, no way to verify the data. We have stated repeatedly that UN representatives can visit the DPR, LPR, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions through Russian territory. However, the UN staff do not use these opportunities. Why does the UN Secretariat find words so easily when it needs to support the Western version of events, and so painfully struggles to find expressions when it needs to call the Ukrainian strike on children a crime? Why do some victims deserve immediate compassion, while others do not? Why does the death of minors in one place become a reason for loud statements and condemnation, while the death of children in Starobelsk is met with silence? Here is another vivid manifestation of Western double standards and hypocrisy. However, this terrorist act could not and did not go unpunished. Mr. President, on May 24th, the Russian armed forces launched a massive strike on military command facilities, air bases, and defense industrial complex enterprises of Ukraine using Oreshnik, Iskander, Kinzhal, and Zircon missiles, air, sea, and land-based cruise missiles, as well as strike UAVs. Among the targets hit in Kyiv and the Kyiv region were facilities of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, military infrastructure, command posts of the main command of the land forces, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and other command posts of the armed forces of Ukraine. Strikes on civilian infrastructure facilities in Ukraine were not planned and were not carried out. This retaliatory strike in the Ukrainian capital is a direct consequence of deliberate steps to fuel the conflict by Zelensky and his handlers. We will not leave unanswered the terror against peaceful Russians, whom Kyiv, with the approving silence of its accomplices in the West, has long turned into an instrument of war. Especially since the cynical terrorist attack in Starobelsk is far from an isolated case. Just last week, as a result of attacks by militants of the Kyiv regime, 51 civilians were killed and another 199 people, including 20 children, were injured. This is not dry statistics, but human lives, women, children, elderly people. During the same period, at civilian targets, including residential areas, schools, hospitals on Russian territory, over 4,300 drones were launched, including at Moscow and the Moscow region. I draw your attention to the fact that under the current conditions, the Russian armed forces continue to consistently deliver systematic strikes on Ukrainian military-industrial complex enterprises in Kyiv, including specific locations for the design, production, programming, and preparation for use of drones used by the Kyiv regime with the assistance of NATO specialists who are responsible for supplying components, providing intelligence, and targeting.
Estimated compensation.
Okay, we'll end it there just to give everybody a brief understanding of what is occurring in the United Nations between the United States and Russia. The United States has the audacity to tell Russia to stop bombing civilian infrastructure, while at the same time they are aware that Ukraine does bomb civilian infrastructure. And they just gave an example in terms of the college, the girls' college, that was bombed by 16 drones sent from Ukraine. Now, to couple that with NATO's involvement with the war, be it in terms of weapons, logistics, and advisors, they are all in. So Russia is in a position where it is battling, not just Ukraine, but other proxies, so to speak, that are in support of Ukraine. Now, again, America is a hypocrite because everyone knows that America not only bombs civilian infrastructure and kills civilians, but they also, when bombing infrastructure, they bomb that infrastructure that serves not the military of the IRGC or Iranian officials or government. They're bombing civilian infrastructure, buildings, places of business, colleges, hospitals, things of that nature. It's just so far-fetched for the United States to come up and try to act like this morally correct, country that, when it goes to war, it does not kill innocents. Again, it's all, narratives and false propaganda. And, for the most part, Russia has been up to this point dealing with Ukraine with kid gloves on. I've always sat back and thought, like, Russia is a superpower, and really, if they wanted to decimate Ukraine, they could have, a long time ago. Russia's objective, and most should know this, is not about the takeover of Ukraine, but more about, getting those regions in Ukraine that are mostly Russian under Russian control and protection. They care very little about the rest of Ukraine. They're more concerned with that Russian populace that has been discriminated against and oppressed by the Ukrainian government. That's their concern. United States knows this, Ukraine knows this, and NATO as well knows this. Now, as to whether or not NATO is going to get involved again with this conflict in Ukraine that Ukraine and Russia is in remains to be seen, because just recently, in content I did previous to this, a Russian drone, a Russian Shahed kamikaze drone, did strike inside of Romania. Romania is a part of the NATO alliance. So that being said, we wait to see what the reaction will be as a result of that strike, that Russian drone striking inside of Romania will be. Romania, as well as a few other countries near Ukraine, have always supplied Ukraine with not only weapons, but logistics and things of that nature. So Russia did make it known that anyone that participated and or assisted Ukraine could very well consider themselves a part of that war. And at Russia's discretion, they will be handled. And it just seems this way, that Russia decided to send Romania a message, by way of a Shahed drone. Again, 24 to 48 hours, we'll know the consequences of that strike inside of Romania by Russia. Whether or not NATO will act is yet to be seen, but I know there's a window anywhere from 24 to 40 hours before we see any kind of movement on this situation. Now, as far as the United Nations go, and the United States ambassador speaking to Russia about what is appropriate and proper, again, that is just so hypocritical of the United States to want to go and jump in someone else's affairs and claim to be morally better at, how they conduct war. When, again, the fact of the matter is, United States initially, when the war started, killed over 160 school children and others, And since the so-called ceasefire negotiations and peace talks, they've done nothing but threaten Iran. I mean, seriously, not only Donald Trump, but Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, they've all, publicly threatened Iran to either capitulate, do what they want them to do, how they want them to do it, or suffer the consequences. So for the United States to get up there and speak to Russia in that tone or manner, where they're saying, hey, you're wrong for threatening Ukraine and, doing the things you're doing, is just so hypocritical of the United States, all right? But again, we're waiting to see what's going to transpire as a result of the missile being fired into Romania by the Russian government, allegedly. As well, we wait to see what the end result of Russia's bombardment of Kyiv will result or, bring to bear. Russia isn't done with Ukraine, as the reports go. They're in the process of striking strategically positions and locations that very well may house military complex or the industrial military complex facilities where they're building these drones, where advisors as well as logistic experts from NATO are housed and helping Ukraine to kind of stay in this war. Again, all this remains to be seen. And when the news comes up and it's fresh, we'll grab it. We'll make content of it and we'll send it out to the people. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. You have been tapped in.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.